Jack, and welcome back, because today I'm going to give you guys my review for the latest Marvel Disney Plus show that came to a close recently that I had the chance to go watch. Secret Invasion. It is created by Kyle Bradstreet and directed by Elise Salim, and it stars Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury alongside Ben Mendelsohn, Emilia Clarke, Don Cheadle, Olivia Colman, Kingsley Ben-Adir, and many more. Let me know down below in the comments what's your opinion on Secret Invasion. I'd love to know that. And with that said, let's get started. The show follows Nick Fury as he returns to Earth after spending years away as he learns of a secret invasion by a faction of shapeshifting Skrulls. As Fury joins the fight, he and Talos and allies race against time to stop an imminent Skrull invasion and save humanity. This was a show I've been really looking forward to from Marvel Disney Plus for a very long time, ever since they announced it a couple years back. I love Samuel L. Jackson. I love him as Nick Fury, and to see him finally get a show that's centered around him, I thought is a great idea. And to take the storyline of Secret Invasion but recontextualize it to fit in the current timeline of the MCU and have it be led by Nick Fury, I thought was actually a good idea. And I like the cast assembled with actors like Olivia Colman, Emilia Clarke, Kingsley Ben-Adir, all joined the MCU with this show, and I was really liking the trailers, the thriller vibe the show was going for. And even though the Marvel Disney Plus shows have been hit or miss over the years, some I've really enjoyed, others didn't reach their full potential, I was really looking forward to Secret Invasion after quite a long time of anticipation. So now that I've had the chance to watch Secret Invasion, I thought it was a fine show. It's boosted by amazing performances from the cast and some really good ideas, but unfortunately, it fell short of its potential. Starting off with the positives, the best thing I can say about Secret Invasion is that the entire cast delivered marvelous performances in the 6 episodes of the show. Samuel L. Jackson, I love him as Nick Fury, and I love him as an actor with a big filmography he has, and he was really good in this show. His dynamics with all these other characters is fascinating, and it's really enjoyable. But even in the smaller moments between certain characters, he really shines. And I love that the show focuses on a much older Nick Fury who spent so many years in space after the events of Avengers Endgame, and now he returned to Earth to solve the Skrull conspiracy. And so as realizing, does Nick Fury still have what it takes to solve the conspiracy after spending so much time away from Earth, and how does his return impact everybody close to him? He was so good, and he was absolutely mesmerizing on screen. I love his dynamic with Ben Mendelsohn as Talos, who's once again really good on this show. I love the little scenes they had with one another in Captain Marvel, and that once again is reapplied in this show. Their back and forth banter with one another is really good here now that we're several decades later and still trying to help each other out while still trying to find a way to stop Gravik, who also is very well played by Kingsley Ben-Adir. He's also in the Barbie movie as a Ken, which he's really good in, and he was also Malcolm X in One Night in Miami, which is a really great movie. And I thought for the role of Gravik, he's definitely a really strong performer in this role. Villain-wise, the character could have been a lot better, but he brought his A game into this role. And there is a scene in the finale, and even earlier on, with Emilia Clarke and Samuel L. Jackson, where he came off as a pretty threatening villain, and that's a lot of it's thanks to his performance, who was really great here. And Don Cheadle plays Rhodey, and it's nice to see a different kind of Rhodey in the show, to see what he's been up to in full for the first time since Endgame, because we've only had him in a guest starring role in Falcon the Winter Soldier Episode 1, and now we see him again for a little bit more in the role. And then Olivia Colman is great as Sonya. She is so funny, really witty, and she is one of the most memorable and fun characters in Secret Invasion, with how she's trying to play out in this whole show with trying to catch Skrulls and what are they doing on Earth, and even how she comes into conflict with all these other characters. She's just so fun to watch here, and so has everybody else delivered really good performances on the show. And even Charlayne Woodard plays Priscilla, the wife of Nick Fury, is amazing, and some of her scenes with Nick Fury are some of the best in the entire show. It's really good character-focused drama that really adds so much to Nick Fury that we haven't really seen much of before outside of this show, and I really like that a lot. One of the things I appreciated about Secret Invasion is that in comparison to the other Marvel Disney Plus shows, this one tries to go for a much darker and bleaker tone. And I really appreciate that the show tried to go into a different direction than what we typically see with these shows, where it has a different edge to it. There's a thriller vibe that they established right from the beginning with episode 1, which I thought was a really nice way to kick off the show. And even though it does feel a little bit like a slow burn, I was liking the slow burn approach to slowly build up to the big climax, and so as establishing some mystery, some sense of paranoia for Nick Fury. And I thought it had a really strong start with the first 2 episodes, which is something the shows tend to do well, as they have a really strong start, and usually how they continue is another story. But Secret Invasion did have a strong start. I like how the ideas it has of dealing with Nick Fury's love life, Nick Fury returning to Earth, how does it affect everybody that he cares about, who is in the situation, trying to figure out what's going on with Skrulls invasion on Earth. And that part of the show was really compelling when it focused more on the character of Fury, and so as the personal stuff he has with all of these characters. And the thriller paranoia vibe was definitely something I appreciated with Secret Invasion, that it tried to go for it, considering Secret Invasion is a storyline where all these Marvel superheroes are dealing with the Skrull invasion, characters are being replaced, and it asks the question of who do you trust? And I thought, for a show, recontextualizing it in the MCU to make it fit Nick Fury, I thought was a good decision, considering where the MCU is currently at right now. And even though there's aspects of the thriller setting that doesn't entirely work, I do think I appreciate the lengths it tries to go to, and it definitely comes off more as unexpected with how darker it gets. It's definitely, like I said, the darkest and bleakest Marvel Disney Plus show, where it does have its moments of being funny, especially with the dynamic between Nick Fury and Talos, but it still keeps the darker tone, which I appreciate for it. And there's some really good story ideas they have with some of these characters that I thought were interesting. I like that it tackles them no matter how the execution played out. I also love the introduction of Emilia Clarke in the MCU as Gaia. She plays the daughter of Talos, and she is really good on the show. She is one of my favorite characters out of Secret Invasion, and I like that her character is walking a tightrope between helping Gravik with what he's trying to accomplish on Earth to help the Skrulls, and so as helping out Fury and Talos and realizing that maybe what Gravik's doing is not entirely ideal for the Skrulls and ideal for the planet itself. And I liked where her story went for the most part over the course of the show. Definitely had some twists and turns in there, and so is how they incorporate Super Skrulls, which won't be for everybody's liking. But I did like what the show does with her majority of the time, and I do like her dynamics with Talos and Gravik and Fury, and just the story she goes on with the show. But I was pretty intrigued by Gaia when it comes to the story. The show had some really good ideas for the character of Nick Fury. It also had some good ideas for how they want the paranoia thriller vibe to play out. And so is the fact that at every episode, it feels like we're building up to something and then something big happens at the end of each episode. And I like that in some ways the stakes rise, even though I feel like with some of these shows, it feels like the tension's not always there because of sometimes the way they continue and the way they are resolved. But I like that in ways the stakes slowly build up as the show continues, where they gotta find ways to stop Gravik even if they had the chance to, and Nick Fury trying to find a way to still go back to being the Nick Fury that he once was, who always gets the job done. And even then, I think what they do with his mission, I think was interesting and intriguing to watch, where I never found the show to be boring to sit through, because sometimes I like a good slow burn. And even though when it comes to slow burn, it's hit or miss with it, I thought I was still intrigued and invested with where Secret Invasion was going with its ideas. And in the end, it does feel like a show where sometimes the ideas do not entirely match execution. The show was at its best when it focused on character dynamics between characters, Fury and Talos, Fury and his wife, Gaia and Talos. That's where the show shined for me, was when it's just characters working with one another, talking to one another, overcoming certain issues they have. And so as dealing with the return of Nick Fury to Earth after the events of Endgame, And I really like the show when it focused more on Fury and it was focusing on the character relationships that everybody has with one another, more so than the actual Skrull invasion. And it does go into pretty unexpected places, and it takes a lot of big swings that don't entirely work for me, even though there are some that I do appreciate it went to those places. And it does go far when it comes to violence in certain points. It's not overly gratuitous or overly violent. But I did like that it seems like they're getting more comfortable with doing more darker things with these shows, because Secret Invasion is easily the most bleakest one to date. And I also liked the first 5 episodes here, where even if I don't think it's a top-tier MCU project, I do think that I was engaged with what the show is doing from the beginning, even up to episode 5. So I still enjoyed a good chunk of what Secret Invasion had to offer. Unfortunately, the show suffered from some of my same issues I had with the other Marvel Disney Plus shows, and it fell short of some of the anticipation I had for it. The first issue I have in mind is it feels like on one hand, it's taking a while to get to certain things, but also feels like we're rushing to get to it at the same time. It's an odd balance of rushing and dragging, and I wish the pacing on that end was a lot tighter and stronger than it was to make things more investing. And the other issue I have with Secret Invasion is I'm not a big fan of the 6-episode format for these shows. And once again, Secret Invasion solidifies why I cannot buy into the format. It simply sabotaged the story and what the show can do by starting off strong, meandering a little bit in the middle, even if I still liked it, and then it just rushed all the way to the end, and it just feels like we're going from point A to point B to point C to point D, all the way to point Z in such a short time that it feels like there's not a lot of time for some of these questions that the show gave us get answered of how did this character become a Skrull? And we don't really see it, it just happens. And considering Secret Invasion is a storyline that repeatedly asks the question, who do you trust? The twist reveals in Secret Invasion were very predictable. In this show, it feels like you know exactly who's a human, who you could trust. You know who's a protagonist and an antagonist. And you also know who a Skrull is. So it feels like the audience, us, and so as the characters, we're losing that sense of investment when it comes to the Secret Invasion adaptation of how do you know if you can trust these characters, because you don't know if they're a Skrull, if they're going to backstab you, or if you could actually trust them during this mission. And all the reveals felt very predictable to me, especially for certain big characters, and I wish the writing was a little bit better when it comes to that, because it feels like if they executed it better, a lot of these reveals could have been so effective, but a lot of them felt like I was able to catch these twists miles in episodes before they even happen. And I don't like to feel that way with shows, but unfortunately Secret Invasion, which is a cool little storyline, and I like that they recontextualized it to be a Nick Fury-led show for the context and wider canon of the MCU. The way the storyline played out in terms of who do you trust, I thought was very underwhelming, because the big gist of it is that the characters don't know who to trust, and neither does the audience, but now it's like you know all the reveals, and so it's not really as exciting from the purpose of plot twists. Another issue I have with Secret Invasion is that they rushed the ending, and the more I think about it, this is probably my least favorite finale of any Marvel Disney Plus show. They introduced something that is intriguing, but I was never really a big fan of that idea that they were going for in the final 2 episodes to wrap everything up. It felt so tonally out of sync with the rest of the show, where the rest of the show was a grounded paranoia thriller, but the finale feels like we took that tone and we just shifted it entirely to what a lot of the finales tend to be, which is big CG third acts and everything gets resolved really quickly. And that was really underwhelming, because the show billed itself as like a slow burn thriller with Nick Fury and the Skrull conspiracy. And this show kind of ditched all of that in the finale, and that was really underwhelming to me, because I was liking the first 5 episodes, even if not every idea worked, and I thought the finale was a really disappointing way to end the show after all my anticipation for the show, and so is what they were doing. It just feels like they did a lot of things that came so out of left field, and it feels like things ended off in a very bad place comparison to where it was the rest of the show. So really underwhelming finale, and the more I think about it, it's probably my least favorite finale out of a single Marvel Disney Plus show. Time to move on to spoilers. The first one I have to mind is apparently Rhodey was a Skrull throughout the whole show. I saw this plot twist coming from a mile away ever since the very first scene of him in the show. And even though I liked that Don Cheadle gave the performance that he gave in Secret Invasion, I do think that the twist for him to be a Skrull was obvious. And I did feel like what they almost did with Rhodey almost felt like you were almost going to hurt the character in a way where when we see the finale, Rhodey gets saved, and it turned out he's in some hospital gear. And it almost gave out the notion that he has been a Skrull since Captain America Civil War. And if that happened, that would have made a lot of the stuff Rhodey did in Infinity War and Endgame worse for it. But what I'm happy about is looking at it is in Infinity War and Endgame, he had the leg brace because he gets paralyzed in Civil War. And he doesn't in this show. So they made the twist very predictable that Rhodey wasn't really Rhodey in this. And another thing I also thought was interesting was having the addition of having Nick Fury's wife in here. I thought that was a really good addition. This was one of the things I really liked about the show, was we finally meet Priscilla, who's also a Skrull named Vara, who she's been with Nick Fury for decades. And this is one of the best parts about the show for me. I love the scenes between one another, especially in episode 4. The dynamic they have is fantastic. Both actors gave really outstanding performances together. And when it comes to just showing how much they do care for another, especially after everything that went down, I love the stuff with them. And I love that the show finally introduces us to Fury's wife in the MCU. Something the show does a lot is at the very end of each episode, they kill off a character. Throughout the 6 episodes of episode 1, they killed off Maria Hill at the end. They killed off Talos at the end of episode 4. They did a fake out death for Guy at the end of episode 3 until the start of episode 4 revealed that she's alive. And then it feels like on one hand, I can see what they were going for. Some of them were gut-wrenching, but then others I saw it coming from miles away, which was pretty unfortunate. And then another thing also is, when it came to Gravik, I thought his character is interesting. He reminded me of Eric Killmonger, but not up to that level. It feels like writing-wise, they could have done a bit better with his character as a villain, because the performance is great, but the writing wasn't on the level of Kingsley Ben-Adir's performance as Gravik. And the way that whole thing was resolved was pretty anticlimactic for me. It feels like it whole ends with Harvest, where ever since Endgame, people are trying to collect the blood of the Avengers and all these characters during the battle for the universe in Avengers Endgame. And so we have Harvest, where it's all in a vial. And then when we thought Fury was encountering Gravik in the finale, they are both in a chamber and it gets used on them. So Gravik is now a really powerful super Skrull with abilities like Captain Marvel's and Thor's and Drax, Groot, Cull Obsidian, Ebony Maw. And then we find out that Nick Fury wasn't actually Nick Fury at that point, but it was Gaia, who is with all these abilities as well. They have this big third act fight, which is really goofy, and it doesn't really fit the show's vibe and tone it was going for. And this was one of the show's ideas I wasn't really big on, was Harvest, where now someone with this kind of abilities is now the most OP character in the MCU. And because of where the show ends, Gaia is now the most OP character in the MCU. She now has the powers of Thor, Cull Obsidian, and Captain Marvel, and all these characters. And it feels like a really cartoonish and weird thing to do, especially in the MCU, that where the character ends off with, it feels really strange that the MCU with Secret Invasion took this route for her character. Because I like Gaia, but it was really odd to end her whole story off in the show, where now she is the most overpowered character with the abilities of many of these characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And wasn't a big fan of the idea of Harvest, and I think that was just a really odd thing that came so out of left field for the show. So Gravik gets killed by Gaia after that big third act fight they have, and because Gravik killed Talos in episode 4, Gaia gets revenge on him and kills him, and it feels very unceremonious and anticlimactic. I think it needed to end with Gravik being defeated, and if they were going to go this route, I wish they did a bit better when it comes to resolving his whole storyline, but it feels like it was resolved really quickly after everything he's done. It feels like it just happened, and then that's it. It didn't feel like much impact really happened there. And what made me really unsatisfied the most with the ending of Secret Invasion is the way it ends things off with the Skrulls being on Earth is significantly worse than it was even before the show, where throughout the show and before now it was the Skrulls are just posing as humans living on Earth in peace, where humans don't even know about their existence. And then the finale happens, and then President Ritson proposed a bill that any extraterrestrial life, especially the Skrulls, that come to Earth must be forced off world or they'll just be exterminated on sight. Why? And Nick Fury warns him about all the trouble and chaos he just caused. And then Nick Fury and his wife leave Earth right at the very end to go to space because now apparently Kree and the Skrulls are now officially able to be in peace talks to hopefully make peace with one another after the decades and long time of chaos between both the Kree and the Skrulls happen, which would set up the Marvels. I wasn't a big fan of that at all. I thought ending the show where the president just incites bigotry and now he's saying like, oh, all Skrulls should be exterminated on sight or forced off the world. It just ends the show on a really downer note, and it just feels really unsatisfying that for a show about Nick Fury returning to Earth to help the Skrulls, and especially after the decades of promising that he'd help them, it feels like Nick Fury saw this, warned them about what President Ritson was doing is wrong, but then he just leaves because, I guess the Kree, who also oppressed the Skrulls, are now in peace talks now. And I'm just like, that doesn't feel very satisfying. And I feel like if some of the stuff was the entire show, that actually would have been interesting. But the way they went about it just did not feel like the right way to end the show. And it feels like Nick Fury left when things got so much worse than they were before Gravik. And I didn't like that at all. It feels like all 6 episodes, they rushed to the end in a finale that is reminiscent of a lot of the issues with other Marvel Disney Plus finales. But this time it feels like what was accomplished, all they did was make things worse than it was before, and it made Talos' death in vain, and Fury was angry about what the president did and even warned him about it. But in the end, it just feels like, well, things are 10 times worse for Skrulls because now they went from just being in hiding to being on the run, and that didn't feel particularly satisfying. In conclusion, I thought Secret Invasion was a fine show. It had some good ideas. I liked most of the episodes, and I loved the performances from the cast, especially Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury and Ben Mendelsohn as Talos. Their dynamic carried a lot of the show for me, and the performances were just great from everybody. And I liked the vibe the show is going for with the thriller tone. But outside of that, it suffered from a lot of the issues I have with the other Marvel Disney Plus shows, and it has a really disappointing resolution to this show that I thought in the long run was a really underwhelming way to wrap it up. So in the end, I'm going to give Secret Invasion a B-. Not quite as good as I hoped, unfortunately. This is a show that had a lot of the makings to be one of my favorite Marvel Disney Plus shows, but it just ended up being on the middle to lower end of it, where it's not my least favorite by a long shot, but it definitely feels like it had so much potential that wasn't quite reached. But the performances are great from the whole cast and crew. I love the focus on Fury, his relationships with everybody, even with Fury and Talos and Fury and his wife, that I thought were very good, and the performances from everybody, they all delivered, and so I was having some good ideas, and I really did like the first 5 episodes in the first half of the show. So didn't stick the landing, unfortunately, and I wonder how much longer the 6-episode format's going to last after this, because I've never really been big on the 6-episode format. But overall, it's a fine show. But I am looking forward to seeing Nick Fury again in the Marvels later this year, which looks like a lot of fun. So wonder what that's going to do for Nick Fury and the characters related to Captain Marvel. So looking forward to that movie, but in the end, the show is okay. So yeah, that's my review for Secret Invasion. What are your thoughts on the show? Let me know down below in the comment section. I'd love to know your thoughts on it. Stay tuned for some upcoming videos I have planned very soon. And don't forget to follow me on social media. My username is down below at the bottom of the screen and at the description below. So please go do that while you're at it. And thank you guys so much for watching. And don't forget to hit that like button and the subscribe button. And stay tuned for more.